On the morning of September 14th, 2019, in a field 3 miles east of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, a man in pressed khakis and a company polo shirt stood beside a John Deere 8R410 tractor worth $412,000 and laughed at Eli Stoltzfus. The tractor had a guidance system that could plant a seed within 1 inch of accuracy across 40 acres without the driver touching the wheel. It had air conditioning. It had a sound system. It had more computing power than the spacecraft that went to the moon. Eli was hitching a single Percheron mare to a walking plow his grandfather had used in 1961. The developer told him it would take a week to plow what the John Deere could finish in 4 hours. Eli said nothing. He checked the leather traces one more time and started down the row. What happened 6 days later would cost the developer everything he had borrowed to buy that machine. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Eli Stoltzfus, because you need to understand what kind of man turns down a $10,000 offer to lease his land for a single growing season. Eli was 43 years old that September. He had been working that same 217 acres since he was 14, the day his father died of a heart attack while mending fence along the eastern property line. He was 14 years old. Eli had been in the south pasture that morning, cutting hay with his father's team of Belgians. He heard his mother's voice calling across the field. By the time he reached his father, the man was already gone, his hand still gripping the fence wire he had been stretching. They buried him 3 days later. The bishop said it was God's will. Eli said nothing. He took over the farm the next morning. He was 14 years old, and he had 7 younger siblings. The land had been in his family since 1873, when his great-great-grandfather bought it for $900 in gold coin from a Quaker family moving west. That ancestor had walked every acre before he paid. He had dug test holes in 12 different spots to check the soil depth. He had tasted the water from the spring in the northwest corner. He had counted the black walnut trees along the creek. Let me tell you why that mattered. When he finally agreed to buy, he paid in gold because he did not trust paper money. The deed was signed in the kitchen of the Quaker family's house. No lawyers, no banks, just 2 men and a handshake, and $900 in coins that had weight. Eli had never borrowed money, not for seed, not for equipment, not for the 2-room addition he built onto his house the year his 4th child was born. He paid cash or he did not buy. This was not frugality. This was Ordnung. The unwritten code that governed every Amish community said nothing specifically about tractors when it was first established. But by 1985, most bishops in Lancaster County had made their position clear. Tractors for field work were forbidden. Stationary engines for sawmills and workshops were permitted. Steel-wheeled tractors for belt power were tolerated. Rubber-tired tractors that could travel roads were an invitation to leave the community. The logic was simple. A man who could drive to town would go to town. A man who went to town would want what town offered. The boundary between the plain people and the English was not a line on a map. It was a speed limit, 12 miles per hour, the speed of a horse. Eli's father had explained this to him when he was 10 years old. They had been standing at the edge of the road watching a neighbor drive past in a pickup truck. The neighbor had left the Gmay 2 years earlier. He waved as he passed. Eli's father did not wave back. That evening, Eli asked why. His father said the truck was not the problem. The leaving was. Once a man could go 30 miles in 30 minutes, he started thinking 30 miles was close. Then 50 miles. Then 100. Pretty soon the Gmay was not enough. The world got bigger and the community got smaller, and a man found himself alone in a truck on a highway with nothing but the radio for company. Eli's father said that was not how people were meant to live. People were meant to know their neighbors, to see the same faces at worship, to raise barns together and bury their dead in the same ground their grandparents were buried in. The truck did not take a man away from the Gmay. It gave him the choice to leave. And once a man had that choice, he started wondering what he was missing. That was the danger, not the machine, the wondering. The developer's name was Marcus Webb. He had arrived in Lancaster County in 2017 with a business plan and a line of credit from a bank in Philadelphia. He was buying up leases on Amish land, planting commodity corn and soybeans with rented equipment, and selling the harvest to ethanol plants and feed distributors. His profit margin depended on scale. He needed at least 1,500 contiguous acres to make the numbers work. By September 2019, he had leases on 14 parcels totaling 1,283 acres. Eli's land was the missing piece. It sat directly in the center of the block. Without it, Marcus had to drive his equipment 3 miles around on public roads to reach the eastern fields, burning diesel and time. He had offered Eli $10,000 to lease the land for 1 season. Eli had refused. Marcus raised the offer to $15,000. Eli said no. Marcus went to $20,000, then $25,000. Eli stopped answering the door. On September 10th, Marcus drove his John Deere 8R into Eli's field and parked it at the edge of the property line where the dirt lane met the county road. He left it there idling for 20 minutes, loud enough that Eli could hear it from the barn. Then he shut it off, walked up to the porch, and made his final offer. $30,000. 1 season. Eli could keep farming his garden plots and the pasture near the house. Marcus would handle everything else: corn in the spring, soybeans in the fall, and a check delivered in December. Eli told him the land was not for lease. Marcus asked him why he would choose to work like a mule when he could sit on his porch and collect a check. Eli said he did not sit on porches. Marcus laughed. He pointed at the Percheron mare standing in the paddock. He said that horse probably ate more in feed than Eli made in profit on the whole 200 acres. Eli said that was possible. Marcus shook his head and walked back to his tractor. He told Eli he would regret turning down that much money. Eli watched him drive away. For a moment, he thought about what $30,000 could buy. A new roof for the barn, a second team of horses, college for the children if they chose to leave. Then he thought about his father's words. Once you take their money, you take their rules. He went back to the barn. There was a worn leather notebook hanging on a nail above the harness rack. He never let anyone open it. Now let me tell you about the weather in September 2019, because this is where the story begins to turn. The summer had been the driest on record in Lancaster County since 1988. By the first week of September, the topsoil was cracked and dusty. The corn in Marcus Webb's leased fields was stunted, the ears small and light. The soybean plants were yellowing early. The NOAA forecast showed a low-pressure system moving up from the Carolinas, expected to arrive on September. It would bring the first significant rain in 11 weeks. Marcus needed to get his soybeans out of the ground before that rain arrived. Wet soybeans could not be harvested. The combines would clog. The beans would mold in the bin. If he missed the window, he would lose the entire crop. His loan payment was due in October. He had borrowed against the expected yield. On September 14th, he mobilized everything he had. 2 John Deere S790 combines, the 8R tractor, a grain cart, and 3 semi-trucks on standby to haul the harvest to the elevator in Ephrata. He started on the western parcels, the ones farthest from Eli's land. The combines moved through the fields at 5 miles per hour, their headers cutting a 30-foot swath. The guidance system kept the rows straight. The yield monitor displayed real-time data on a screen in the cab. Bushels per acre, moisture content, grain loss. Marcus sat in the 8R tractor pulling the grain cart and watched the numbers. They were bad. 18 bushels per acre. The break-even point was 32. He was losing money on every acre he harvested. But he had no choice. If he left the crop in the field, he would lose everything. Eli spent September 14th plowing. He used the Percheron mare and the single-bottom walking plow. The plow turned 1 furrow at a time, 14 inches wide. He walked behind it, his hands on the wooden handles, his eyes on the line. The mare's name was Molly. She was 8 years old, 16 hands tall, and weighed 1,100 pounds. She could pull steadily for 6 hours if the ground was not too hard. Eli had bought her as a 2-year-old from a breeder in Holmes County, Ohio. He had paid $800. He had trained her himself, starting with a light forecart, then a heavier wagon, then finally the plow. It took 2 years before she was ready for a full day's work. Some men rushed the training. They hitched a young horse to a heavy load and whipped it when it balked. Those horses either broke or turned mean. Eli did not rush. He worked Molly an hour a day the first year, 2 hours the second. By the time she was 4, she knew his voice and his hands and the weight of the work. She trusted him. That trust was worth more than speed. A horse that trusted you would pull until its heart gave out. A horse that feared you would quit the first chance it got. Eli plowed 3 acres that day. Marcus Webb's combines harvested 240. That evening, Eli unhitched Molly, brushed her down, and fed her a mix of oats and molasses. He checked her hooves for stones. He ran his hands down her legs, feeling for heat or swelling. She was sound. He led her out to the pasture and watched her roll in the grass. Then he walked out to the edge of his field and looked at the sky. The air smelled like rain. Not the fresh smell of a summer shower. The heavy smell of a system moving in from the south, the kind that settles in for days. He went back to the barn and took the leather notebook down from the nail. Inside were 43 years of observations written in pencil. Dates, weather patterns, soil conditions, planting times. His father had started the notebook in 1976. Eli had continued it. On September 14, 2019, he wrote, "Barometer dropping, wind shifting east, rain comes early." He underlined the last 3 words twice. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been the only one who saw the storm coming? Not the weather, the other kind. The kind that shows up in the numbers, in the way people talk, in the promises that sound too good. Eli had watched Marcus Webb lease up the land around him for 2 years. He had watched the tractors get bigger, the loans get larger, the fields get emptier of people. He had not said much about it. The Amish do not preach to the English. But he had known. His father had lived through the farm crisis of the 1980s. Eli had been a boy then, but he remembered. He remembered the auction sales, the families loading furniture into trucks, the fields going back to weeds because no one could afford to farm them. His father had survived because he owed nothing. The bank cannot take what you do not owe them. Eli had learned that lesson in his bones. On September 16th, the forecast changed. The low-pressure system was moving faster than expected. Rain would arrive on the evening of September 18th, not the 20th. Marcus Webb had 72 hours to harvest 900 acres of soybeans. He brought in a third combine, rented from a dealer in Harrisburg for $3,000 a day. He ran all 3 machines from dawn until the headlights came on, then kept running them under the lights until midnight. The guidance system allowed the operators to work in the dark. The GPS knew where the rows were, even when the drivers could not see them. By the evening of September 17th, Marcus had harvested 650 acres. He was going to make it, barely, but he was going to make it. Eli plowed 12 acres in those 3 days. On the evening of September 17th, he was harrowing the plowed ground with a spike-tooth harrow pulled by Molly, when he saw the clouds building in the southeast. They were low and dark, moving faster than the forecast had predicted. He finished the row, unhitched the harrow, and led Molly back to the barn. Then he walked over to the property line where his land met Marcus Webb's leased fields. The soybeans were still standing on 230 acres. The combines were working the far western edge, 3 miles away. Eli could see their lights. He looked at the sky again. The rain was not coming on the evening of the 18th. It was coming tonight. At 9:47 p.m. on September 17, 2019, the GPS guidance system on all 3 of Marcus Webb's combines shut down simultaneously. The system relied on a signal from a network of satellites maintained by a private company under contract with John Deere. That network had suffered a technical failure. The company would later blame a software update. The combines did not stop working. The engines still ran. The headers still turned. But the guidance system was gone. The operators could not see the rows in the dark. If they tried to cut soybeans blind, they would miss half the crop and tear up the machinery on the parts they hit wrong. Marcus made the decision to shut down for the night. He told the operators to park the combines and go home. They would start again at first light. The forecast still said the rain would hold off until evening. They would have all day. It would be tight, but they would finish. The rain started at 2:30 a.m. Eli heard it on the roof. He got out of bed, dressed, and walked out to the barn. He lit a kerosene lamp and stood in the doorway, watching the water come down. It was not a drizzle. It was a steady, soaking rain, the kind that does not stop for days. He thought about Marcus Webb. He thought about the 230 acres of soybeans still in the field. He thought about the loans. Then he went back into the barn, took the leather notebook off the nail, and opened it to a page his father had written in 1983. The page said, "When the English fall, do not gloat. Help them stand. That is Gelassenheit." At 6:15 a.m., Marcus Webb stood at the edge of his soybean field and watched the rain turn the dirt to mud. The combines could not run. The ground was too soft. The machines would sink. He had 230 acres of soybeans that would be worthless in 3 days. His loan payment was $47,000. He had $18,000 in the bank. He sat down on the bumper of his truck and put his head in his hands. That was when he saw the horse. Molly was coming across the field, pulling a forecart with Eli Stoltzfus walking beside her. The rain was running off the brim of Eli's hat. He stopped at the edge of the field and looked at Marcus. Then he said, "I can get you beans out." Marcus stared at him. He asked, "How?" Eli nodded toward Molly. He said a horse does not sink like a tractor. He said the old binders could cut soybeans if the blades were sharp. He said it would take time, but it could be done. Marcus asked him why he would help. Eli said it was what neighbors did. Marcus told him he had 3 days. Eli said he knew. What happened over the next 72 hours is still talked about in the Gmay. Eli went back to his barn and hitched Molly to a grain binder he had bought at an estate sale in 1996. The machine had belonged to an old order family in Mifflin County. The widow was selling off her husband's equipment to pay medical bills. Eli had driven 3 hours in a hired van to look at it. The binder had been built in 1947 by International Harvester. It was designed to cut wheat and tie it into bundles with twine. The mechanism was simple. A sickle bar cut the stalks. A reel swept them onto a canvas conveyor. The conveyor fed them into a knotter that tied them with twine and kicked the bundles out the side. No engine, no hydraulics. Just gears and levers, and a ground-driven wheel that powered the whole system. Eli had paid $200 for it. He brought it home and spent a week taking it apart, cleaning every bearing, sharpening the sickle bar, and replacing the canvas. Then he put it in the back of the barn and did not touch it for 23 years. Until now. The binder had been built for wheat, but it would work for soybeans if the settings were right. Soybeans grew lower to the ground than wheat. The sickle bar had to be adjusted down. The reel had to spin slower or it would shatter the pods. The knotter had to be tightened because soybean stalks were thinner than wheat. Eli spent 2 hours making the adjustments. He tested the knotter by hand, feeding stalks through and watching the twine loop and tie. When he was satisfied, he hitched Molly to the tongue and drove out to the edge of Marcus Webb's field. Then he started cutting. The ground was soft, but Molly's hooves did not sink. She weighed 1,100 pounds, but that weight was distributed across 4 small points that flexed and adjusted with every step. A hoof is not a tire. It does not compress the soil. It punches through the surface and finds solid ground underneath. The binder cut a 5-foot swath. Molly pulled it at 2 miles per hour. Eli cut 6 acres the first day. Marcus watched from the edge of the field. He did not say anything. He stood beside his truck with his arms crossed and watched a man and a horse do work that his $400,000 tractor could not do. On the second day, Eli's neighbors started arriving. 3 more Amish farmers, each with a horse and a binder, then 5 more. By the afternoon of September 19th, there were 12 teams working Marcus Webb's field. They cut in silence, the only sound the snip of the blades and the steady clop of hooves in the mud. The rain never stopped. It came down in sheets, then eased to a drizzle, then came down hard again. The combines sat parked under tarps, useless. The GPS system came back online on the morning of September 20th, but it did not matter. The machines could not move. The ground was saturated. A John Deere S790 combine weighs 22,000 pounds empty. On soft ground, it sinks. The Amish crews worked through the rain. They did not stop for lunch. The women brought food out to the field in covered baskets, bread and cheese and cold chicken. The men ate standing up, then went back to work. By the evening of September 20th, they had cut and bundled 230 acres of soybeans. They stacked the bundles in long rows to dry under tarps Eli had borrowed from a Mennonite neighbor who ran a construction business. Marcus Webb stood in the middle of his field and watched them work. When the last bundle was tied, Eli unhitched Molly and walked over to where Marcus was standing. Marcus asked him what he owed. Eli said he owed nothing. Marcus said that was not possible. Eli told him it was Gmay. When one falls, the others lift. That is how it works. Marcus asked why they would lift him. He was not Amish. He was not even a neighbor, not really. He had spent 2 years trying to push Eli off his land. Eli said the land did not care who owned the deed. The land only cared who took care of it. Then he led Molly back across the field toward home. The rain was still falling. Molly's hooves made soft sucking sounds in the mud. Eli did not look back. Marcus Webb sold his equipment in November 2019. He paid off his loans and walked away from farming. He moved back to Philadelphia and took a job with a logistics company. He told people he had tried farming, and it had not worked out. He did not tell them about the rain, or the horse, or the 12 Amish men who had saved him from bankruptcy. The last thing he did before he left Lancaster County was drive out to Eli Stoltzfus's farm. He found Eli in the barn, mending harness. The leather was old and cracked. Eli was stitching a new piece into the breast collar, his needle moving slow and careful. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time before Eli looked up. Marcus told him he had been wrong. About the horse, about the plow, about all of it. He said he had spent 2 years trying to make the land produce more than it wanted to give, and it had broken him. Eli said the land did not break people. People broke themselves. Marcus asked him how he knew when to stop pushing. Eli thought about that for a long time. He set the harness down and walked over to the window. Outside, Molly was standing in the pasture with the young gelding, Samuel. They were grazing side by side, their heads down, their tails swishing at flies. Eli watched them for a minute. Then he said, "You listen. The land tells you, but you have to be quiet enough to hear it." Marcus asked him what the land was saying now. Eli said it was saying the same thing it always said. Grow what belongs here. Take what you need, leave the rest. Do not borrow against next year to pay for this year. Do not plant what you cannot harvest with your own hands or the hands of your neighbors. Do not trust a machine that needs a satellite to know where it is. Marcus nodded. He shook Eli's hand and left. Eli went back to mending the harness. That evening he took the leather notebook down from the nail and wrote, September 20, 2019. Harvest complete. 12 teams, 3 days. Gelassenheit holds. He closed the notebook and hung it back on the nail. Then he went outside and stood in the pasture with Molly and Samuel. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing from the west. The fields were dark and wet, but they would dry. They always did. Eli put his hand on Molly's neck. She turned her head and looked at him with one large brown eye. He told her she had done good work. She went back to the John Deere 8R410 sold at auction for $218,000, less than half what Marcus had paid for it. The buyer was a farm cooperative in Ohio. They had to hire a software technician to unlock the guidance system because the subscription had lapsed. The Percheron mare, Molly, is still working Eli Stoltzfus's fields. She is 13 years old now. Eli's oldest son, Amish, has started learning to handle her. There is a second Percheron in the barn now, a 3-year-old gelding named Samuel. Eli is training him on the forecart. In another 2 years, Samuel will be ready for the plow. The leather notebook still hangs on the nail above the harness rack. Amish has started reading it. Eli has told him that when the time comes, the notebook will be his. Not the land, not the house. Because the land will teach him what it knows, but only if he writes it down. That is how knowledge stays, not in machines, not in software. In the quiet attention of a man who listens to what the ground is saying and writes it in pencil so his son can read it when the rain comes again. Let me tell you what I learned from this. There is a kind of poverty that comes from having everything you need, and a kind of wealth that comes from owing nothing. Eli Stoltzfus was not rich. His farm produced enough to feed his family and sell a little surplus at market. He did not own a tractor worth $400,000. He owned a horse, a plow, and a notebook full of his father's handwriting. When the rain came, the tractor could not move. The horse could. That is not luck. That is not sentiment. That is physics. A horse distributes its weight across 4 points of contact that adjust to the ground. A tractor concentrates its weight on 2 wide tires that sink when the soil is saturated. The engineers who designed the John Deere 8R knew this. They built it for speed and scale, not for mud. They assumed the weather would cooperate. Eli assumed nothing. He watched the sky. He read his father's notes. He knew the rain was coming early because the barometer in the barn had been dropping for 2 days, and the wind had shifted east. He did not need a satellite to tell him that. He needed 43 years of paying attention. There is a second thing I learned. When Marcus Webb stood in that field and asked Eli why the Amish would help him, Eli said it was Gmay. The word means community, but it means more than that. It means the people you are bound to, not by choice, but by proximity and need. The Gmay does not ask if you deserve help. It asks if you need it. Marcus had spent 2 years treating the land like a resource to extract. He had not been a neighbor. He had been a competitor. But when he fell, the Gmay lifted him anyway. Not because he had earned it, because that is what the Gmay does. I do not know if Marcus Webb understood that. I do know he left farming. Maybe he learned something. Maybe he just learned that he was not built for it. Either way, the land is still there. Eli is still farming it. The notebook is still hanging on the nail. If someone in your family left you knowledge instead of money, if they showed you how to read the weather or fix what others would throw away, tell me about them in the comments. This is Old Tractor Stories.